Hey everybody, Mr. Regan here, and today we are looking at our very last set of tasks where we are going to be examining the rubric we're going to use on the summative to grade our short answer questions. We're going to hopefully take what you did and make some connections to how to use this and how you're going to be graded, not only for our space collision phenomenon, but also how you're going to be graded when we get to the short answers on our summative. So hopefully we put our green check mark in the grade that we feel we deserve, because now we're going to break down kind of what a good example is, an example that would get us high marks in the meets expectation, if not higher. And then based on kind of how I break that down, you'll kind of answer the survey question. Did we give ourselves a decent grade compared to what I showed you? Do you feel you deserve a better one? And then from there, we'll kind of break things down. We'll also get some more practice here in task 10 with some short answer types of questions that we would use the rubric to grade. So in other words, what you're seeing is what will also show up on the summative. So let's go ahead and get into how to use this rubric with our space pod phenomenon. So I'm going to dive into that Amplify page. And note, I'm going to use both of these questions here, but I'm only going to use the rubric once to grade them, okay? And I'll kind of break that down here in a little bit in a second. So the first question was, what happened to the pod during those seconds that the communication was lost? And then that second question here is, after the collision, how does the pod's motion compare to the motion of the space station? So the bigger question that maybe encompasses both of these answers is, what happened before, during, and after our space pod collision? So let's go ahead and look at the before. During the time the communication was lost, the space pod was approaching the space station with a normal velocity but a larger mass than usual. Notice I'm pointing out some of that important detail, some information leading to the collision. Because the mass was larger than normal, the normal amount of thruster force designed to stop the pod from docking was not strong enough. So there's the big thing right there. I point out that relationship between force, mass, and velocity, okay? Because of this force and this mass, this is what should have happened to the velocity, but instead, this is what happened to the velocity. I'm pointing out how these three things are related in the context of the collision. This heavier mass caused the thruster force to exert a force that only slowed it. As a result of this miscalculation of mass to thruster force, the pod was not affected the same, collided with the space station. So a few things, folks. Let's go ahead and look at the rubric really quick. Number one, we infer how the force within a collision caused a specific effect on the object involved. We're not there yet. That will be in question 2. But let's look at this next part. By explaining the relationship between force, mass, and velocity before, during, and after collision. So right now, I'm explaining the relationship between force, mass, and velocity before the collision. So I'm breaking down that first part of our rubric right now, okay? And I'm using a lot of that detail from our phenomenon, from the question, from what would be everything we learned to answer that. So let's look at the next part, which is probably the more important part for our rubric. So, as the pod and the space station collided, they both exerted forces upon one another, equal in strength but opposite in direction. Notice I'm pointing out that big key concept we looked at earlier. Because the mass of the pod and station were so different, this caused both objects to have different velocities after they collided. Different masses, different velocities, same force. Notice I'm pointing out that force, mass, and velocity relationship again. The effect of the same force, okay, same force on a small and large object caused the pod to move away from the station with a much faster velocity than the space station. So notice, I'm pointing out, because we have those equal forces, the smaller object would be moving away faster than the larger object. That would be moving away slower, okay? And from there, folks, if we're going to look at our rubric again, do we infer how the forces within the collision cause a specific effect? Absolutely, okay? We had a specific cause to effect. The collision and all the mass, force, and velocity leading up to that collision caused a specific outcome. Caused, okay, the pod to move away from the space station faster. Do we explain the relation between force, mass, and velocity before, during, and after the collision? We do. We did that in part 1, the before. We explained during the collision they had equal forces, even though their masses were different. And the after, we talked about how their velocities were different. So notice we're doing a lot to incorporate the before, during, and after. We're inferring about a specific cause and effect relationship, and we're bringing it all together within the context of our phenomenon. So, ladies and gentlemen, that would be a strong set of responses. That would get a strong grade on the overall rubric. So now that we've broken it down, it's your job to compare my response to your response and answer our survey question. Do you feel confident you understand the rubric? And would you keep your original rubric grade the same? That tells me I understand the rubric. I used it correctly. It doesn't matter if you give yourself high marks or low marks. You know how to use the rubric and how it makes sense. Would you change your grade to a different score? So maybe you gave your score a little higher, but you looked at mine and you're like, oh, that's a much better one. Or maybe you gave yourself a little lower score, but hey, yours looks like mine. You deserve a higher score, and so on. If you have questions on how to fill this out, or if you want to go over your specific response together, reach out to me. Otherwise, we have a few more tasks before the end. Reach out to me if you need help with anything at all. Good luck.